Hi, I'm Hannah,
And I'm Lydia.
and we are a pair of bookends.
And we were just hoping that we could interrupt this episode to ask you very kindly if you would sign up to our Patreon.
Yes, if you have some spare change rattling around in your pocket, we would so appreciate it if you could go over to patreon.com/a pair of bookends where you can support our work. We have been doing this podcast for nearly 2 years now, and we wanted the opportunity to get to know some of you a little better. And via our Patreon, as well as getting exclusive benefits, you can also have the opportunities to share your own recommendations with us and to chat with us. And it's just a nice place for us to have our own little hub.
For less than a price of a coffee, you can get exclusive Patreon only benefits, such as our Patreon exclusive book club, where you get to pick the book that we read each month, and also
Early access to all podcast episodes.
and your chance to ask our authors your own questions.
So please do, if you can, sign up to our Patreon via patreon.com/a pair of bookends and support our work. We would appreciate it more than you can imagine, and it helps us hugely to bring you all the extra special stuff.
So come and officially become a bookend.
Now on to today's episode. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Welcome to another instalment in our debut Spotlight series, where we shine a light on the freshest authors and their work. Today, we point the spotlight on Like Happiness, a searing and sharp debut novel about the complexities of gender, power, race, and fame, told through a young woman's destructive relationship with a legendary writer.
Ursula Villarreal-Moura is a writer. She was born and raised in San Antonio, Texas, is a graduate of Middlebury College and received her MFA from Sarah Lawrence College. Her stories, essays, and reviews have featured across numerous publications, including Tin House, Catapult, Washington Square Story, Midnight Breakfast, and many more. She contributed to Forward 21st Century Flash Fiction, a flash anthology by writers of colour, and in 2012 she won the Cutbank Big Fish Flash Fiction Prose Poetry Contest. Her writing has been nominated for Best of the Net, Best Small Fictions, a Pushcart Prize, and longlisted for Best American Short Stories 2015. Her flash fiction collection, Math for the Self-Crippling, was published in the US in 2022 and was selected by Zinzi Clemens as the Gold Line Press Fiction Contest winner. Her debut novel, Like Happiness, is out in the UK on the 4th of April and published by Pushkin Press. And we are so excited to be chatting to Ursula herself all about it today. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm quite honored.
Oh, we're quite honoured to have you. I feel like it's been so exciting to look at all the different things that you've got. And I was really very upset that we don't have your other book in the UK yet, because I was really hoping that I'd be able to get hold of a copy of that after finishing Like Happiness. So I don't know if that is on the horizon. Will we get Math for Self-Crippling here?
Oh, I hope so. Hopefully that's in the works. We'll see.
I would like that very much, yes.
Yeah. We will petition for that to happen. So we always love to start our podcast by asking our favorite question, which is, what are you currently reading?
Yes, I love this question. So I'm reading two books. I'm a professor, so I'm always teaching and reading along with my students. And so right now I'm reading Confessions, which is at least that's the title in English. It's a Japanese novel by Kanai Minato. It's a suspense book. My students love it. So I'm rereading that. And I am rereading When the Reckoning Comes by Latanya McQueen, which is a novel set during a wedding at a plantation. It's kind of a horror story as well. And so I'm really excited to be teaching that this week as well.
That sounds wonderful. How do you split your time between teaching and writing?
Oh, just like being teetering on the edge of a nervous breakdown every week. I think that's like the most apt way to say it, honestly. It's really challenging. A lot of my friends have, 9 to 5 jobs, and then by 5 or 6, they're just, binge watching TV and, going to bars. And I'm like, I'm still reading and grading. or I'm working on my novel now in the library.
Oh my
So it
gosh.
is quite a juggling act, but that's what I'm doing. Yeah.
I can imagine it's a juggling act. Like, do you ever get time for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I love to go on runs, and so I like being in nature and kind of spacing out and not having any deadlines during those times. So yeah, definitely. But it is, it would be great if my
Hmm.
schedule had a few more hours every day.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. So I want to talk about the writing process and the kind of road to publication for this book. So as our listeners will have heard in our intro, you have been writing for quite a long time, and you've wrote in lots of different mediums, but most of your work, I believe, has been short form. At what point did you know this story would kind of become a novel, and what has the process been like for you in writing it?
Sure. So I really did. I went to graduate school thinking I'm just going to write short stories. I'm going to be like Raymond Carver or Alice Munro, just these small little things all the time. And I then started writing a story my second year of grad school that became a novella. And so I was writing 14-page short stories or 20-page short stories. And then I had one that became, at some point, I think 37 pages. And I gave it to my friend who is part of my cohort. Her name is Alexandra Ford. She's actually a UK writer now. She has this book with Sarah Sarin. Is that the name of the press in the UK?
Yeah.
Okay, and she didn't have the book out when I gave her this November. But anyway, many years ago, I gave her this, and I said, "What do I do with this? It's like 37 pages, and I don't know. Like, is this a story? It feels like it should be longer." And she gave me about, I don't know, 50 questions to answer about it. And that was all her feedback. She didn't say it was good, bad, anything. She said, I just wanted to know all this. And I realized that I wanted to know the answers to those questions as well. And so I realized, okay, maybe if I start answering these questions and seeing, then it'll become something. And to be honest, I had to kind of trick myself and believe I was still working on a story because the idea of a novel was just so overwhelming. I couldn't possibly wrap my mind around the fact that I could write a novel. It just was so daunting. So I just started answering these questions and seeing, and before I knew it, I had, a novel basically. And then at that point, I thought, okay, now I need to go back and revise. I have to see if all these scenes are necessary. I need to, see if there's an arc, if this is engaging in any sense. So that's how it started. I really would have never tried to just write a novel on my own because it just, it's like kind of scaling a mountain or something that seemed outside of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, I have always had it in my mind that I would write a book someday, but the idea just completely daunts me. So I love speaking to writers when they've written their first book, especially because it's like, how do you take that step and actually do it rather than just thinking about doing it? But I believe that Like Happiness went on submission 3 times before it was picked up. So how do you keep yourself motivated during that time?
Yeah, so I had another agent at some point before the pandemic, and she couldn't sell the book. And that was really heartbreaking. And I thought, okay, I had heard so many times that writers write a book and then they just kind of put it in a drawer and it never becomes anything. And then they have to write something else. And I thought, okay, maybe that is my path. Maybe I need to write another book. And so I did start writing another book. And then my agent didn't like that one. So I thought, okay, so I have an option here. I can either pursue the second book or I can find another agent who maybe believes in the first book, which is the path that I ultimately took. And so I found another agent. She fell in love with the book and she said, I think we can sell it. And I said, I don't know if you really can because it is so hard to go back to, some of these places that possibly have rejected it or, there's maybe already chatter that, it's been passed on. And so that is kind of the path I took. I tried to, I guess, remain hopeful. I believe that there were times where I would read the manuscript myself. I remember one time I printed it out and put it kind of like in a spiral. We have something like the Kinko's, like where you can, whatever, make it into like a presentation book or whatever. And I took it one time with me on a plane, on a flight, and I was reading it and I got so engrossed in it. And I had two thoughts. One is I have to tell my friend to read this book. And the second one is I want to rate it on Goodreads. And my third thought was, you can't because you wrote it. It's your novel. You forgot. And that was a moment where I thought, okay, you can't give up on this. You can't, because you got so wrapped up in it that you forgot you were the author But this is your imagination you're in. You were living, walking around with these people, and it didn't exist outside of your mind. And so when that happened to me, I thought, okay, like I'm going to find a way to make this a reality.
That's incredible. That's got to be the biggest compliment to yourself, that you're reading it and think that I love this. Yeah, I wrote it.
It is absolutely fantastic, and thank goodness that you did write it, because we absolutely adored reading it. Onto the book itself, the basis of the narrative is our protagonist Tatum becoming deeply obsessed with a novel and then its author. Her obsession with the book soon kind of spills into reality when she gets to meet him in person, and we see how sort of like expectations of her as a reader and this kind of image she has in her head of what this author will be like, and the actual reality of who he is, how they come kind of together. Can you tell us a bit more about how the book explores the kind of author-reader dynamics, and what did you want to explore by writing about this?
It's a great question. I have always been bookish, and I've always preferred to be reading, sometimes over socializing even. And I think it's very easy to, when you fall in love with the book, to idolize the author behind it. And that's what Tatum does. And so I was very interested in that kind of, I guess, addictive quality to reading. And then kind of, as you said, the spillover, I was really interested in the power dynamics of that. And also just the gender dynamics that happen in this particular story. Some of the kind of maybe skirting the edge with some of the sexuality that's happening, both undercurrents as well as maybe in some scenes overt kind of themes. I was really interested in, I think these are kind of the surface things that I was interested in, but the larger idea that I was obsessed with at this time was the idea of self-actualization. And so I wanted to have a character who was self-actualized and one who was not, and to see how the non-self-actualized person was actually trying to use the self-actualized person to kind of as a catalyst for her own development. And, I wanted to see if that was possible with these two characters. Whether that was possible or not is up to the readers to decide. But that was basically my larger project.
I absolutely loved Tatum as a character. I thought she was such a fantastic protagonist, and I felt like I related to her in how bookish that she was and how much she loved books and reading, and I think Lydia felt exactly the same. But the thing that I found really interesting is that as a character, she doesn't seem aware of how capable she is as a person. She doesn't believe in herself. But us as the readers, we're like, no, like we believe that you can do X, Y, and Z. And I know that you've said in other interviews when you were talking about the writing of this novel that this isn't autobiographical, but I wondered where this kind of lack of confidence came from, and if that's something that you've experienced within yourself, and whether that was something that you wanted to translate to the page through that character.
Yeah, I think that there have been a lot of moments in my life where I was a little bit like Tatum. I wouldn't say that she is me at all, but there have been moments where later I would think, oh, I should have spoken up. I should have said something in that situation, or that didn't go the way I wanted. And I, could have said no, or I could have done this instead. I think for a lot of women, there is that moment afterwards when you have time to reflect where I was not my best advocate, So definitely there is that. I think you're absolutely correct. There are moments where she is capable of a lot more, but she does feel perhaps limited. And I think that has to do with her gender. I think that has to do with her racial identity. I think there are a lot of subliminal clues that she's looking for or picking up on. There's a scene in the MoMA, the museum, where she is internalizing just like the idea of the people around her and what that means about her. And I think that there are, that's something that can happen to a lot of people. And so definitely she's very sensitive, and whether she's accurate or not in her reads is, I guess, also left to the reader.
That scene at the moment, oh my gosh, it brings me out in a rash.
Yeah.
It honestly, it makes me feel sick. You write it so well, that feeling of kind of insular anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and kind of just mounting, and there's not a huge thing that's happening. There's not this big massive thing that she can react to, but it's just this building of this tension and this anxiety and this feeling, and you write it so well that I think I had to take a break after I read it. I had to have have a little
But
breath.
I think that whole scene at the moment, like I think why it affected us in such a way, Lydia, is we've spoken on the podcast before about like me and Lydia are from like working class backgrounds, and I know like in the UK that feels very much like we don't belong in those sorts of spaces. So the fact that we're both actors, it's quite difficult that we don't feel like we can walk into certain, theatres or whatever without feeling like we don't quite belong. So her feeling of not quite belonging in those spaces really resonated with me in that sense. But then I know, like you've just said, it's the element of her gender and also her racial identity. And there's just so many moments where she feels like an outsider and doesn't feel like she can advocate for herself. And I think there was not only the scene in the MoMA, but I think there's also when she's in class and they're reading that book, and there's quite a lot of sort of racist undertones in this book, and nobody else notices it, but she doesn't feel able, as the one Latina person in that room, she doesn't feel able to speak up on that. Is that something that you wanted? Like, what about that did you want the readers to understand about that experience?
There were a couple things I wanted the readers to understand. I wanted the readers to see that when that happens repeatedly throughout someone's life, that it has a very cumulative effect, and that it really does shape decision making.
Mm-hmm.
A person, I think the word that I used in the novel is pivots. Tatum is constantly pivoting so that she can avoid more distress. And in that pivot, what happens is that, Tatum sacrifices parts of herself, parts of her autonomy, because her biggest fear is not belonging or not being even welcomed or accepted. And so she maintains a friendship or a relationship or a situationship in which she just doesn't want to be rejected.
Yeah, you definitely get a sense of that. And I think it's, her not only feeling that way in sort of the literary world, but also like there's a bigger thing at play here, which is that she's navigating that in America, which isn't the most open-minded place in the world. So yeah, I really loved how you navigated her experience in the book, and the way that she as a character navigated that experience. I thought it was really great to read, and kind of gives a lot of, I mean, this feels like I'm dulling it down, but it feels like it gave me a lot of food for thought. So yeah.
I'm happy to hear that. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, I know we've gone quite deep quite early on. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, slightly less deep, but was the soundtrack to this book, which I think needs to be made into a Spotify playlist if it's not already. Please and thank you. Because the music that Tatum listens to, she always picks something that's very specific to the moment, the feel of it. And because of who I am, obviously, I then put that music on when I'm reading, because I'm like, oh, well, she's listening to the Smiths. Let's get the Smiths on. And it's absolutely a wonderful addition to the book, the kind of art and culture behind a lot of Tatum's tastes. What was it like creating Tatum's kind of tastes and the music that she would listen to and the art that she enjoyed? Was that something that you were really kind of focused on, or did it come naturally with the development of the character?
I've never been asked this question. I love it. It did take a little bit of time, and a lot in the revisions got cut out. So there were more, I guess, references to music and to paintings. Some of it is my own personal taste, and some of it is not. There's a painting that Tatum is drawn to at the McNay Museum in San Antonio, which is always one that I have been drawn to. So that was fairly easy. And I was transformed the moment I saw the How Soon Is Now video as a teenager. I thought, this is mind blowing. I've never seen anything so. I was speechless. I don't even know what the words were. Maybe like hip and cool and austere and detached and spot on with emotional, I don't know, ennui. And so some of those were easy. I did do a lot of research though especially because this is a book of my imagination. At one point, she's at Williams College, which I shouldn't say this, but I've never stepped foot on that campus. I don't know the museums that are nearby. So I had to do a lot of research to figure out what is inside these museums, what would she be drawn to and why, or what would she reject as an exhibit. So I did do quite a bit of research, and her aesthetic, even in terms of music, is a little bit all over the place. It's very eclectic. She listens to music in English and Spanish. She listens to, like you said, the Smiths. She listens to some reggaeton. She listens to bossa nova. So I think that was an aspect of the book that I really had a lot of fun with. And also because Tatum is so flawed, I did want to give her at least this dimension where she was worldly and kind of expansive in a way that she wasn't within her own, I guess, trajectory or personality even.
I would like to ask a question, as we are a podcast for bookish people. She is a big rereader. Are you a rereader?
Oh, yes. I mean, the two books I'm teaching right now are rereads. I think there's something very respectful in rereading, if that could be a word, to know that, or to feel like I was kind of mesmerized enough
Mhm.
that I didn't even know what was going on. Like I didn't see the strings behind it or the scaffolding or the kind of the architecture of a book. And so I love to reread to see like what effects the author had or used that kind of mesmerized me, that got me hooked. And sometimes I'm, through several rereads, I'm able to pinpoint, oh, it's the voice or it's this, or like whatever the, technique might be. And sometimes I still fall under this like magical spell that or that I don't know or that I don't let myself know so that I can remain really enamored with the book. And so, I know what's going to happen,
Mhm.
but I'm still walking into it, ready to surrender myself.
Yeah, it's always so fun to see like the new things that you pick up when you reread something. But
Mm.
I've only reread a handful of books, and Lydia's a massive rereader. So I was so fascinated by how many times that Tatum was rereading these books. I was like, how? Like I feel anxious at the prospect of like how many unread books there are on my shelf, and I'm like, I feel guilty kind of going back to read something else for the second, third, however many times, instead of picking up a new book and actually reading that, because I feel like it's like judging me.
No, I mean, I feel both perspectives as a rereader because it's horrible to say, but also a luxury to admit. I probably have hundreds of books I haven't
Mhm.
read in my apartment.
Mhm.
And I mean, we could probably, if we, sold them all, like I could have diamonds. Like that's how many books I have, right? That I haven't read. But I don't want diamonds. I want the books.
Yeah.
And so I feel that tug, like, oh, I just need to get to all of them and give them their due time and respect and love them. But I have heard many times, and maybe you two have heard this as well, that sometimes people with anxiety like to revisit. Like
Mhm.
there's this idea that why is The Office still so popular in the US? And it's like because people who watch The Office, even though they know what's going to happen, they can quote the dialogue, they know when they're going to laugh or used to laugh like 20 times before. And I kind of wonder if I'm rereading a lot of things to ease my anxiety because like there is not going to be that much suspense on the sixth read of a book.
Mhm.
Um, but there is still this like calming meditative effect that takes over maybe to my like parasympathetic nervous system that washes me over in really, wonderful hormones.
I completely agree. And anyone that knows how many times I've watched the series Fleabag will understand. Hannah's always like, again? I'm like, yeah,
Again.
one more time.
It's so good though. It's so
Well,
good.
one thing I would say to you, Hannah, is how many times do you read a script when you get a script? You read it over and over and
Oh
over and
yeah,
over.
so many times.
So I'm just
I don't
saying.
know. Yeah, no, that's true. And I have started rereading stuff.
Yeah, yeah, you are.
I feel like doing the podcast has made me like want to
Mm.
reread stuff before like speaking to people, but I don't know. I still feel like I've got a load of shelves full of books just staring at me like, "Hello, are you going to read me?" And I'm like, "Okay, I'm sorry." But I really want to talk about the relationship in your book, and that is what the book centers on. So we have Tatum's relationship with the famed writer Mateo Dominguez, and as we gradually learn throughout the book, there is this real power imbalance in their dynamic. And I feel like there has been in other books, there's been sort of like a maybe darker or more graphic representation of that sort of dynamic. But this one feels almost like insidious, like we learn different things. And I don't think Tatum realizes, she's gradually realizing the sort of imbalance in this dynamic. Was this a conscious choice to navigate their dynamic in that way?
Absolutely. I'm really interested in kind of granular microaggressor, granular, I guess, transgressions, where, we're all, I guess, therapy tells us many things, but, everyone's a human being, everyone has their flaws, we can accept people. And Tatum takes that to, the nth degree, where she is so accepting, she can forgive all the time. And so I was very interested in portraying a character who was so generous, and I wanted to see where that generosity would lead.
I was so interested in the way that you did that, because like me and Lydia were talking about the different representations of this dynamic in different books that we've read, and we were saying, there's been like we were talking about My Dark Vanessa before, and obviously that's like a teacher student sort of dynamic, but we were saying how like that feels like you're constantly being hit in the face with the book, like it's really intense and dark. But this sort of takes a totally different route to that, but it is still, when you really think about it, it is really dark. And I'm trying to be so careful about giving any spoilers away.
It's very
but
hard.
it is this gradual of like, oh my gosh, this is what's going on here. Like this is just getting worse and worse. And at first you kind of think, like this might actually be all right. Like, yeah, there's a bit of an age gap. Yeah, there's probably something a bit odd here, but okay, we're gonna go with it. And then as the story goes on, you're like, what on earth? Like, get out. She needs to get out right now.
I won't tell you what I wrote in the message.
I was just going to say that. I got a message off Lydia when she finished the book, and it was literally all caps, a paragraph about how much she despised Mateo. And she was like, why is he like this? Why did he do this? I was like, okay.
Yeah,
she was mad.
I was angry.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting is a people who have read early reviewer copies have described it as a much older man and a younger woman, which is very interesting to me, because I think throughout the book, at least once or maybe twice, I say that he's only 8 years older, which is significant, but he's not, like in My Dark Vanessa, he is not rating her. He is not, does not have the, I guess, control over Tatum as, in that book, for example. So I did want to make it so that it could almost look normal. It could almost pass as a relationship, a situationship. But then, once we get inside of it and look at it more deeply, it's just toxic.
But it's so weird, like the holdover he has. And I don't understand like what that is. Why?
I think he manages to gaslight her so much
Yeah.
in the way that he kind of says, I'm going to give you this much, and then I'm going to pull away, and then I'm going to give you this much, and then I'm going to pull away. And don't worry, I can pay for this, but then I'm going to pull away. And there's this constant kind of like carrot and stick method with him of like, I'm going to keep her sweet enough that I can get what I need until we get to a point where I no longer need her. And it does feel that way. But because we do read it from Tatum's perspective, you kind of, some of the things that happen, you kind of do go, oh, okay. Okay, because these are little incremental things. And then when you finish the book and you look back, you think, oh my God, she's wasted half her life. Like she's wasted half of her life.
Yeah.
But instead, it's kind of like you go along with it with her because it doesn't seem that toxic, these small microaggressions, these small little things. And I think that's just such a fascinating way to approach it, because it could have been this massive, huge, I don't know, romantic relationship swept away and it be just this wonderful journey. And instead it wasn't. It was this kind of like, she didn't know where she stood the entire time. And I loved it. I loved it.
Sorry, we've just basically ranted at you. Like it's...
Yeah.
No, I love this. This is great because there were many times where I thought, are people going to understand? You know, he gives her a little bit, let's go on this trip. Who wouldn't want to go on a trip, right? Like, of course. And let's fly first class. Of course, let's do this. And then, you know, what is her debt to him then in return? And so it's like you said, carrot and stick throughout. And on the surface, if you just read one scene, you would say, I don't think there's anything that wrong with this. But then, you know, a decade of it, my gosh.
So the whole story, barring Tatum's interaction with a reporter, is told directly to Mateo in the form of a letter. This direct address is a wonderful way of structuring the book. Why did you choose this form, and what do you think it gives us as the reader?
I have been interested in second person point of view for a while, and I think there's an intimacy in it that's actually even a little different than first person. And so I think in first person, someone just tells you everything and it's there. And I think in second person, there's the ability to be a little bit more guarded because you know there's actually a receiver to this. And so I wanted to explore second person, and I've never liked third person. I've loved reading third person, but I am not a very good writer in third person. So I thought these are my options, first or second person. And so I decided to do second person. And for many of the years that I was writing this book, it was in second person, but I didn't have that alternate timeline going through it, which we have with the reporter. That was introduced much later in the writing process, which I think works now and is a really good point of reflection for younger Tatum. But I just think that there's, you know, the way that Tatum became addicted to this relationship. I think there's an addictive quality that sometimes can happen in second person that hopefully comes across in some of these chapters and pages.
There is one other relationship that I want to ask about, and that is Tatum's relationship with Vera. And Tatum's obviously reflecting back on her relationship with Mateo, and we know that she's with Vera kind of throughout this reflection period. And Vera is this very like loving and supportive partner. And I was quite curious as to the choice of this, and I could be wrong, but was it important to you that she found this loving and supportive relationship with a woman following her bad experiences with men?
So throughout the book, we understand that Tatum's sexual identity is confusing to her. She's figuring things out, and she's, I think, at the beginning of the book, operating the way that many young people do, thinking that that the goals that they want to achieve throughout their life are the ones that society has laid out for us. So you get an education, you get in a relationship, most of the time a hetero relationship, you know, get a job, you start a family, whatever. And so Tatum is trying to follow that script. And then throughout the novel, she realizes that that is someone else's dream. That is not necessarily her own dream. And she's been very busy pursuing things for this, you know, woman that she thought she was supposed to be. And so when she finally does have this moment, she has a few moments throughout the novel where she realizes, like, I don't think this is who I am, or I think that, you know, it's more complicated for me. I wanted to show her reckoning with that realization. And I wanted her at the end to, you know, find out what self-actualization means to her. And for her, self-actualization means ending up with Vera, actually.
Yeah, and there was actually a quote that I've got, and I don't know if you'll let me keep this in the podcast, but she says later in the book, what if the problem was not, I'm not going to say the name, or any love interest, but how I loved people? Do you think she is kind of seeing that she's at fault in the way that these things are ending up?
I think definitely there is some realization, self-realization that's happening. She's incredibly naive throughout most of the book, and she's kind of wants to blur over anything that's unpleasant until she starts pivoting against it. She's okay with a lot of things. I mean, she wouldn't ask herself that question unless she was having a moment of self-doubt. And so I think that she definitely does. Whether she comes to a conclusion or not remains to be seen. But she has enough awareness to question.
It makes me so frustrated because I'm like, no, it's not you, it's them.
It's always them.
It's always them. I have so many feelings.
So many feelings. This is a very emotive book. This would
Yeah.
be a perfect book for a book club, I
Oh my
think,
God, yes.
because I
100%.
feel like you could just talk about it for hours and hours.
Yeah. I feel like I might just try and start one again just to
Yeah, just
sit down, everybody. I'm just going to rant at you for the next hour about all my feelings. Okay.
So we always like to ask our authors about their literary influences because it's always fascinating to look into what kind of books people read, what they feel like influences their writing. And this is a book that is very much full of culture, full of literature. So could you tell us a little bit about your literary influences?
Sure. I am obsessed with two writers, particular. Well, maybe a little more than two, but
Fantastic.
Always ends up being more.
Music
yes,
to me.
two deceased writers. One is Roberto Bolaño, the Chilean writer who lived in Mexico and then in Spain. I love his work, and he mostly, I mean, he has novels, obviously. I read a lot of his short stories. I have read his novels. I don't know if his work actually has influenced mine, though, if I'm being honest. And then the other writer is Muriel Spark, who I'm obsessed with, the Scottish writer. And I do think a little bit of her aesthetic can be seen in my work. I do mention The Driver's Seat in Like Happiness. It's a book that I've reread multiple times. And I think that there's something, she's just, I think, incorporates just different peculiar things here and there and ties them together. I'm thinking of her book Robinson, in which there's a plane crash and then there's a cat who's very animated and a character in the book. And so I think that there's some of her and I think she's also, her women characters are very interesting. Sigrid Nunez is another influence, and she also incorporates animals. There are no animals, unfortunately. Actually, there are animals. There's 3 cats in like
There are named perfectly as well. They have
yes,
So
fantastic
good.
literary names.
yes. So I do think that there's some undercurrents of that happening. There are other writers that I love a lot, but I don't think that I think Sigrid Nunez and Muriel Spark are the ones that have, I think there's a little bit of, DNA of theirs in my work.
I have not read any of those authors. Please don't hate me. So I need to thank you for this literary education because I need to solve that immediately. And you are also the second author in a row to recommend Sigrid Nunez. So that needs to be rectified clearly.
It's aligning now.
It
There's
does.
something telling us in the universe that we've got to get on it.
And I heard the book that you said before, as soon as you said that it includes a plane crash, Lydia perked up immediately because she's honestly obsessed with anything to do with planes and plane crashes. It's quite
Some specialist subjects.
the kind of last question I wanted to ask is, obviously Tatum's very bookish and she has this clear love for literature, and I feel like you could just kind of leave her with the books and she'd be more than happy. Why do you think she doesn't go down the career path into becoming a writer?
Well, I think she at first lacks the confidence to do so. And I think by the end, maybe she associates that career path with Mateo. And
Yes.
so kind of wants some distance from that.
Mm-hmm.
The ironic thing is, in a sense, she wrote the book, right? It's her voice. She doesn't,
Yeah.
but she doesn't want to be famous. She does not
Yeah.
she doesn't have the same aspirations. She now realizes the difference between what is expected versus what she wants. And so in a sense, she does write a book, but her, what she wants from life is something different. And
Yeah.
so she loves being in museums too. So thankfully she ends up in one.
There's an absolutely gorgeous, I'm going to read your book back at you, by the way, because I have to. Because there's a gorgeous, gorgeous little quote here that is about Tatum's kind of discovery of how fantastic books can be. And I just love it. So it's, in middle school, I stumbled across a young adult book titled Say Goodnight, Gracie. It was about a defining friendship that abruptly ends. I had never lost a best friend, but the book spoke so deeply to me that I taught myself to read it in a single sitting. I started planning my reading of Say Goodnight, Gracie as if it were an event. Thursday nights, I'd prepare by washing and freezing a Ziploc bag of grapes for my Friday night reading of it. The book became my friend, and together we'd welcome twilight on my bed. I mean,
good.
for all of our bookends listening, like that's just Our passion for books, our passion for literature is definitely in that paragraph.
So basically, go get your copy of this book, everybody. There is going to be a link in the show notes for our UK listeners to get their copy. Is this already out in the US?
It publishes March 26th in the US.
Oh
So
my goodness.
there's
Gorgeous. Okay, well, we can pop both links in the show notes then. That is excellent news. So, yes, congratulations to our US and UK listeners. You've got this to look forward to. Go pre-order your copies immediately. This is very exciting. And lastly, we have to ask if you've got any recommendations to leave our listeners with.
absolutely, I always have recommendations. I know that this is mostly a fiction. We've been talking about fiction.
Give us whatever you've got.
So I know you have this in the UK, Hijab Butch Blues by Lamia H. It's a memoir about a Muslim young woman who is reckoning with her religion and her sexuality. Lots of, actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, some parallels with Tatum as well. So I read this last year. I thought it was brilliant.
It's a gorgeous cover as well.
It's beautiful.
Yes.
So gorgeous. Oh my gosh.
Yes, I saw the UK one. It's also very artful. It's a little funkier. I think this is a little traditional, but the UK one is very funky. There's a couple books that I'm meaning to read, but because I'm teaching, I haven't gotten to them yet. But once the semester ends, I'm going to be reading Wandering Stars by Orange. I love There There. I'm actually teaching There There next week. Another reread, but this is, a signed copy. So I'm very, very in love, actually. And then I think this is a book that has already appeared in the UK, but just hit US. Ordinary Human Feelings by Megan, excuse me. It's not like I know Meg. Oh, Meg and I. Megan. Meg, if you hear this, contact me.
Meg.
Yes. So this is on my list. I read something of hers in The Guardian that I thought was just so amazing and sucked me in. And it was so long too that I didn't even realize that I was just scrolling on my phone, for like pages and pages. And so I thought I really need to read this.
She's such an incredible writer. We were very lucky to have her on the podcast last year to talk about that book. But if you've not already read her debut novel, Acts of Desperation, that is also an incredible read as well. Really powerful, and a lot about power dynamics and relationships in her debut as well. So I would really recommend that one. It's very good.
And I also think we can call her Meg because she's friend of the pod. So
yes,
friend
so
of the
Meg.
podcast, we can call her Meg.
I love that. Those are so many good recommendations. So thank you. I kind of had a feeling that you'd very much deliver on the recommendation front. But always. But thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real preva? What am I saying? Words, a real preva. I try to say privilege and pleasure at the same time.
Well, Hannah, as well. You've done all of this podcast without
It's been a long month and it's the 18th. Okay. It's been a real pleasure chatting to you today. So thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you on social media if you are anywhere?
I am at a website. I'm at my name, ursulavillarreal-moura.com. There's a way to contact me through there.
Perfect.
I used to be on the app that was called Twitter. I no longer am.
Good for you. It's awful.
Yeah, it felt dreadful after a while, and I just preferred the feeling of not being there. So I don't really have that much of a social media presence right now.
But our listeners can have a look on your website, see what's coming up for you. They can order your book, which is very exciting, and then they can come and speak to us about it because we need to know everyone else's thoughts and feelings. Listeners, go buy your copies. And if you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you could rate, review and subscribe, as it helps us hugely. You can also find us at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And for more exclusive content, also on Patreon. But lastly, thank you so much, Ursula. It's been a joy chatting to you, as I've said already. And thanks, yeah.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you.
Thank you. And for our lovely listeners, goodbye.